Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description. This Captain Wears Red by OP Wonders. Luffy's finally embarked on his own adventure. With his past weighing heavy on his shoulders, he'll move forward towards his dream of becoming Pirate King. He'll gather a crew that rivals Whitebeard's and show all those Marines who held him captive for so long what happens when you mess with a D. OP Luffy X, harem I don't own anything. Adios.
Time passed by slowly, but Luffy didn't mind. Back when he was on the Moby, there were always so many people, so many things happening at once that it was always chaotic. And sometimes even overwhelming. Now that he was on his own only sailing with two other people, it was much calmer and more peaceful than it had ever been in all his time on the Moby. Of course, there were pros and cons to both situations, and he loved both everyone on the Moby as well as his two new friends here equally. It was just different was all. The two boats slowly sailed across the ocean, Nami telling them that they should reach the next island by tomorrow. This meant that Luffy had to entertain himself until then, though. Nami was still on Buggy's ship, not having come over to their smaller boat at all, and Luffy decided he wouldn't go bother her over there unless she wanted him to. Even though she'd agreed to come along with them, Luffy knew she was still apprehensive and cautious of them, so he would leave her alone. However, that meant he was on a smaller boat with not much room for activities like he'd wanted. Zoro didn't seem to mind, the man napping against the railing in the sun, and Luffy decided that he wouldn't mind a nap either. He had had a long day after all, what with getting carried away by a bird, being thrown in a cage, fighting a lion, some pirates, and Buggy, and then finally running away from the citizens of the town. It had been a long, eventful day, so a nap would be a welcome joy right now. Jumping off the bow, Luffy moved to sit against the railing, tilting his hat over his eyes so that it would shield them from the sun, but then he was reminded of its tattered state when the sun leaked through the slashes on the top of it. He frowned, taking the hat off and looking at it carefully, feeling the edges of the torn straw. If you give me that, I can sew it back up for you," Nami said with a slight hesitance from her boat. Luffy turned to her in surprise, blinking as he took in the woman's emotions. Looking from his hat, then back to her, he grinned. "Really?" he asked excitedly, pleased with the idea that the hat could be fixed. Nami hummed, holding her hand out over the railing towards Luffy, who handed over the hat. "It's really that important to you?" she asked as she pulled out a needle and thread, sitting against her railing as she got to work. "Yeah, it represents a promise I made a long time ago. It's my treasure," Luffy said, beaming as he thought of Shanks. Nami looked over her shoulder at him and eyed his expression carefully before turning back to the hat. "You should be more careful with it then," she said matter-of-factly. There was a silence as Luffy watched Nami work, leaning on his railing and watching the careful needlework as the redhead worked. It was nostalgic, reminding him of when he would watch Izo work on sewing up his ship brother's clothing, sometimes even his own clothes. Eventually, the navigator finished up, putting her supplies away and handing it over to Luffy, who cheered. "You fixed it," he called out happily, holding the hat in the air and noting that there were no more tears in it. "I only sewed it back together. If you're too rough with it, it'll rip again, so be careful," Nami said, holding the needle in her mouth as she put the string in the bag. "Thanks," Luffy said to her, and Nami was about to tell him it was no problem, she did owe him after all, but then Luffy poked a hole through the recently patched up hat, looking to her as he sucked in his lips. "Idiot," she shouted, leaning over the railings and poking him in the forehead with the needle she'd yet to put away. "Ow, you poked me with the needle," Luffy cried, rubbing his forehead. "I know, it's the only way I can hurt you," she said as she took the hat back to fix again. "Oh, you're right," Luffy agreed, understanding now why she'd done it. Nami sighed in irritation while Zoro peeked an eye open at them. "Stop all that yelling, I'm trying to take a nap," Zoro told them, closing his eye again and resuming said nap. Luffy looked to him and laughed quietly to himself before settling against the railing as well, arms behind his head as he looked at the sky. It was quiet again, only the sound of the waves hitting their boat breaking the silence while Luffy waited patiently for his hat to once again be fixed. A few minutes later his view of the sky was blocked as the hat was pushed over his eyes. "There, if you rip it again, I'm not fixing it," Nami said, crossing her arms as she looked at Luffy with a stern look. The teen lifted the hat up from his eyes, noticing the hole he'd created was gone once more and beamed, nodding to Nami. "Right, thanks again Nami," he told her, the girl only huffing and disappearing into the cabin of her boat, leaving Luffy with a sleeping Zoro. Deciding to take the nap he'd planned on taking earlier, Luffy pushed the hat over his eyes again, smiling as no light peeked through this time. It was some time later that the peaceful air took a quick turn. With a start, Luffy woke up, his eyes wide and breathing slightly heavier. He had a moment of panic when he saw how dark it was, his mind telling him that he was back in the dark cells, back in the facility, back with the doctors, with Haru. Before he could panic too much though, he felt his hat and realized that was what was blocking his vision. There were only two presences near him, both relatively calm in comparison to him, and when he felt that, he remembered where he was and what was happening. Lifting his hat up, he saw Zoro lounging still, though now he was awake and looking to the sky. Nami was nowhere to be seen, so she was most likely inside her cabin still, but Luffy didn't mind. He'd had all the confirmation he needed to remind himself that he was out on the open ocean, free from the marines, and free from the facility. Taking a few calming deep breaths, Luffy stood and went to his bag, Zoro's eyes turning to watch him as he did. Ever since the swordsman had joined, he hadn't seen Luffy touch the bag once despite the fact that it had been with them the entire time. It had merely sat at the end of their small boat untouched. Luffy knelt down, opening the bag and searching through it, pushing aside the pirate fund from Ace and the folder of his medical history from Whiskey. Resting at the bottom of the bag was the mini den to the Moby, as well as Luffy's latest journal. His many other ones were all left behind on the Moby seeing as they were full and he had no use for them. He grabbed the journal, but before he closed up the bag he saw a small tube with a cork on it. Looking at the tube for a minute, Luffy finally reached into the bag and grabbed it, closing the bag afterwards and standing. "What's that?" Zoro asked, eyeing the tube as he watched Luffy walk back over to where he'd been napping previously. Luffy looked to Zoro, then to the tube, and held it out to the swordsman. "It's smelly stuff. If I go to sleep and don't wake up, open this and put it under my nose. Don't put it too close though or else I'll hit it and spill it when I wake up," Luffy told his swordsman, his face emotionless as he held out the tube to Zoro. The swordsman raised an eyebrow at that, wondering what Luffy was talking about, but grabbed the tube regardless. "If you don't wake up, what do you mean?" Zoro asked, because that sounded ominous, as if Luffy was going to die or something. "Sometimes when I go to sleep I don't wake up. Whiskey, my doctor back on the Moby, she made that so people could wake me up when I couldn't," Luffy said as he sat down, opening his journal and beginning to write down his latest nightmare. Zoro watched Luffy another moment before shrugging and putting the tube in his pocket, careful to make sure that the cork stayed on. Even though he was still confused, had more questions, and wanted to know what the heck made Luffy not wake up, the look on Luffy's face told him that it would be better if he didn't ask. So he didn't. It'd be reckless to go straight into the Grand Lee. Zoro and Luffy, the two lounging on their boat. Luffy turned to look at her from where he sat on the bow, an apple core in his mouth which he pulled out. "Yeah, some meat would be nice to have first," Luffy agreed, before eating the apple core whole. It was the next day now, the sun high in the sky, and Luffy was still amazed by how nice the weather was in the East Blue compared to the New World. Eating nothing but fruit every day is no good, he continued as he looked at the barrel of apples that they had on board. "Need some booze, too," Zoro added. Right after the last word left his mouth he was hit by an apple thrown at his head. "What are you talking about?" Nami asked. On the bow Luffy caught the apple that had bounced off of Zoro's head before it could fall into the water and ate it. Zoro in the meanwhile looked to the redhead who was tossing another apple in her hand, a look of annoyance on her face. "That's not what I mean. The Grand Line is the most dangerous place in the world," she told them, Zoro listening with a blank look while Luffy continued eating. "Actually, I think the New World is the most dangerous place in the world," Luffy corrected, munching on the apple. Nami blinked, eyebrows furrowing in confusion as she looked to Luffy. "The New World?" she asked. "Yeah, the second half, right after the Grand Line. The New World is much worse than the Grand Line, which is why the Grand Line is nicknamed Paradise in comparison," Luffy said, having both of his companions' attention as he spoke. "I almost forgot who I was traveling with," Nami said, wilting slightly as her fear sparked up again. She still couldn't quite believe Luffy was a former Whitebeard pirate in the East Blue and she was willingly traveling with him. Hopefully, he was enough of an idiot that when the time inevitably came she would be able to trick him and leave without issue. "That reminds me, you said you left the Whitebeard's crew, right?" Nami asked for clarification. Luffy nodded, eating the apple core of the apple he'd just finished. "So does that mean you're not on good terms with them anymore? Are they gonna come after you or something?" Nami asked, having been wondering about that for a while now. She didn't think any pirate crew would take kindly to deserters, especially the strongest man in the world. Zoro looked to Luffy in curiosity as well now, interested in what the answer would be. He hadn't thought of that before. Luffy had made it sound like he was still on good terms with his previous crew, but he hadn't exactly asked him outright. It would be nice to know whether they had to worry about the world's strongest crew coming after them so soon in their journey. "Pops, nah, they said they were gonna let me do this on my own. They're still my family, and Pop said he'll help out if I need anything, but I don't want him to," Luffy told them. Nami sighed in relief and Zoro nodded, smiling and feeling a slight relief himself. "Well, regardless, we need more people if we're going to be traveling the Grand Line. It may not be as bad as the New World, but that doesn't mean it'll be a walk in the park. The lack of crew members and equipment, not to mention we don't have a proper ship. There's no way we could survive like this," she exclaimed as Luffy looked back to the ocean in front of him. "Yeah, we need a cook, and a musician," Luffy said with a smile. A musician? Zoro laughed, wondering why that was one of Luffy's priorities. You're so stupid, Nami said in defeat, wilting again. Looking out to the water she sighed. A little to the south of here is an island with people living on it. It'd be best if we can get a hold of a real ship there, Nami said as she looked at her map. Alright, time to eat some meat, Luffy cheered, arms in the air as he smiled widely. Don't forget the booze, Zoro added with a smile of his own. You idiots, finally on dry land again, Zoro said with a yawn, stretching his arm out over his head as he did. Luffy was looking around the beach excitedly while Nami examined it much more carefully. There's a village past here? Luffy asked Nami seeing as she had the map. Yeah, it looks like it's a small one, though, she said as she looked to her map. Wahoo, in that case, meat, 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 Luffy cheered, running over to Nami to get a look at the map himself. There's a place to eat in this village, right? Luffy asked excitedly, mouth salivating at the thought of eating actual meat again rather than fruits. Forget about the meat for a minute, will you? Nami asked with a ticked-off expression on her face. She leaned her whole body away from Luffy, hugging the map closer in a poor attempt at getting him to back off. Zoro, who was still yawning and stretching behind them, suddenly perked up, eyebrow raising as he looked to the forest. Huh? Careful, I think someone's nearby, he said, hand on his sword hilt as he pushed the sword out slightly. Luffy looked away from Nami now, stretching out his haki and realizing Zoro was right. Oh, yeah, there is. Hey, you, where can we get some meat? Luffy asked, surprising everyone as he looked to a section of the shrubbery up on the cliff. Instead of words, he was met with a barely audible shriek and then a barrage of pellets that came flying at his feet. Luffy was able to dodge all of them with ease while Zoro turned to watch in surprise and Nami ran for cover by the boats. Once the barrage was over, one after another, pirate flags began raising in the shrubs, and even though Luffy knew there was no one holding them, it still amazed him. So cool, he shouted out with a giant smile. Is this the time to be impressed? Nami shouted from the cover of the boat. From where Luffy had noticed a person earlier, a laugh came. Someone was standing there now rather than hiding, arms crossed over their chest as they stood confidently, but Luffy could feel that they were fairly nervous and scared. I am Usopp, leader of the great pirates who reign over this village. People praise me and then me more as Captain Usopp. At the man's bold announcement, Luffy's awe disappeared and instead, a look of confusion took over his face as he felt the lies coming from the man. If you're thinking of attacking this village, then forget it, my 80 million subordinates won't sit by quietly, Usopp shouted, arms outstretched beside him, gesturing to the many flags still waving around him. Even though he could still feel the lies, he couldn't help being drawn in by them, that awe quickly returning. Instead of calling the man out on his lies, Luffy instead pressed his hands to his face as his jaw dropped. Awesome, he shouted out while Zoro raised an eyebrow at him and Nami sighed as she shook her head, not scared anymore. It's obvious he's lying, she said, leaning casually against the boat. Yikes, she saw through it, Usopp shrieked out, Luffy's awe disappearing. See, I told you, she said with a mischievous grin, making Usopp squirm. I admitted it to her, he cried to himself. Yeah, but it still sounded cool, Luffy said, Zoro and Nami realizing now that the boy had known all along that the man was lying. Even he knew, Usopp cried louder, falling to his knees. Curse you crafty tactician, 80 million may have been an exaggeration, but I do have great men under my command, Usopp shouted, his false confidence back as he sprung back to his feet, gesturing to the now moving flags. Luffy didn't feel any lies this time, and that only caused his awe to return. Again, even though he could only field 3 other people in the bushes. Yeah, maybe 3 people, Nami said, still grinning slyly, and Luffy briefly wondered if she had cool powers too, or even haki. She saw through it, 3 kids screamed as they stood from the bushes, each holding 2 of the flags in their hands. Our run, they shouted, dropping the flags and turning tail as they ran off. Hey you guys, don't run away, Usopp shrieked, eyes bulging in shock and beginning to sweat. I've never heard of pirates using slingshot as she picked up one of the pellets from the sand, looking at it with a smile. Luffy laughed, turning to look at Usopp. You're neat, he said before laughing some more. He meant it too, because even though he could feel the fear and nervousness in Usopp, the man was still putting a brave front on in front of them. Hey, you, don't you insult me. I'm a very proud man. Because of my great pride, people call me, Proud Usopp. You saw it yourself just now, Usopp said as he took his slingshot out again and ready to shot. Up until the last part, Luffy hadn't felt any lies in Usopp, and again his smile left his face, watching the man with a blank look, hands on his hips. My slingshot skills are far greater than your average pistol, Usopp continued, still pulling the band of his slingshot back, ready to fire at any moment. Luffy shadowed his eyes with his hat before speaking. Now that you've drawn your pistol, are you ready to put your life on the line? Luffy asked, shocking Usopp and the others with his sudden seriousness. Usopp asked, frowning a bit. I'm saying those aren't for threatening people, Luffy said. Zoro's face changed to a smirk as he turned from his captain to look at Usopp, readying his sword again. What you're looking at now are real pirates, Zoro called to Usopp, sending him a menacing look. There were a few moments where all Usopp did was hold his slingshot ready, staring at the two pirates in front of him that were far more intimidating than he had thought they'd be for only two people. Dropping the pebble he'd held to the ground and letting the now empty sling go, Usopp fell to his knees, sweating profusely. Our real pirates definitely have way more punch behind their words. Awesome. Usopp muttered quietly. Zoro and Luffy looked at each other briefly after that before they both burst out laughing. We stole those lines, Luffy told Usopp with a smile now. Usopp asked in shock, leaning forward as if he hadn't heard them correctly. From Shanks, a pirate I respect, Luffy continued, but could both feel and see Usopp's surprise grow. Shanks? You know red-haired Shanks, the great pirate? Usopp asked incredulously, leaning back in shock. Yeah, your dad's Usopp, right? Luffy asked, recognizing Usopp's name from the many stories Usopp had told him. Usopp shrieked, this time leaning too far forward in his surprise and tumbling down the cliff landing in front of Zoro and Luffy who looked down at him. Yeah, Usopp is my old man. But how do you know that? Usopp asked as he sat up, eyebrows furrowed in confusion as he frowned. This is when their small group of four decided having this conversation, as much fun as it had been, would be easier if the newcomers were fed, namely Luffy. That's how they all ended up inside a small restaurant cleverly labeled Meshi. Luffy happily ate yet another plate of meat while Zoro finally got all the drinks he wanted and Nami finished her normal human-sized plate of food. Usopp sat at the end of the table, eating his own food as they all smiled and enjoyed themselves. Good, huh? Usopp asked, his mouth full as he spoke. Following his example, Luffy didn't even bother swallowing as he spoke. I met him when I was a kid, Luffy said, answering Usopp's earlier question of how he knew Usopp. So my old man's on Shanks' ship? Usopp asked with a smile, eager to hear more. Yep. You guys look the same, so when I first saw you, I wondered. Luffy told him, finally swallowing the bite in his mouth, but promptly taking another. Really? My old man's on such an awesome ship? Usopp asked, looking towards the ceiling dreamily at the thought. I saw him a couple of years ago too. He was still with Shanks then, so I bet he's still with him now. After all, your dad was a good sharpshooter, Luffy said as he picked up an apple next, remembering back on Dawn Island when he'd watched Usopp shoot an apple off of a barrel. Usopp, I heard enough about you to make my ears sore. Usopp is a great pirate. Luffy admitted, still smiling as he spoke, apple in hand. The long-nosed man leaned in closer to Luffy, grinning ear to ear. Yeah, huh? I'm proud of my old man, who leapt onto these possibly endless seas to live with his life on the line, Usopp said. Luffy feeling every bit of pride coming from the man as he'd implied, making his own grin widen. Then that makes this easier, Nami said with a smile from where she sat across from Luffy. Do you have any friends in this village who know how to sail and anyone who can supply a big ship? She asked once she had Usopp's attention. As you can see, it's just a tiny village. Sorry, but we can't live up to your hopes. Usopp said, resting his cheek against his head as he looked to the ground, smiling nervously as he spoke. On top of the hill, Zoro started, Usopp stiffening in surprise and looking to the man. There was a huge mansion. The swordsman continued, looking out the window towards where he knew the hill to be. Luffy ate his apple quietly, watching as he felt Usopp's nervousness increase. Say, do you know them, Usopp? Think you could ask them to help pay for one? Nami asked hopefully, hands clasped together in front of her as she smiled. A sudden wave of protective anger came over Usopp, causing Luffy to falter in his next bite as he blocked the feeling from influencing him, surprised by the suddenness of it. You can't go there, Usopp shouted, Nami and Zoro looking at him in surprise while Luffy finally calmed down, putting the apple down. Usopp seemed to realize his outburst and yelled out, sweating as he smiled and looked away. I just remembered something I have to do. I have lots of influence here. Eat and drink as much as you want, alright? Later, Usopp told them hurriedly as he stood from the box he'd been sitting on at the end of the table. With that he grabbed his bag and quickly ran out the door. Nami leaned out of her seat and turned to watch him leave, but Luffy was unconcerned, picking his apple up and continuing to eat it as if everything that had just happened was normal. He'd felt Usopp's lies, but he'd also felt the fear too, and the fact that Usopp had been so protective over this hill house made him realize there was probably something important to him there. Anyways, Usopp was an interesting person, and if Luffy wanted to talk to him again he'd just follow his scent and find him that way. Why is he in such a rush? Nam asked in confusion. Seeing as she wasn't going to get any answers though, she merely shrugged before turning back to the table and grabbing an apple of her own to snack on as she waited for Luffy and Zoro to finish their meals. Well, in Zoro's case it was mostly just drinks. Some time passed as they sat there, chatting amongst themselves when they were interrupted. The Usopp pirates have arrived. Luffy looked to the doors of the three children he recognized by a scent from earlier, each holding a tiny wooden sword pointed their way. Nami turned again to look at the door, confused as to what was happening. "Who are they?" she asked as she observed them. "The captain is gone." "You don't think he—" The frontmost child ran up to their table, wooden sword still raised in the air as he addressed them. "Hate pirates," he started, his friends running up behind them while Luffy drank from his mug, smiling to himself. "What did you do with our captain Usopp?" The one in front asked them, the same protectiveness in him that had been in Usopp earlier, along with his fear and nervousness. "What did you do with him?" The other two shouted in unison, the same feelings in them that were in the first child. Done with drinking, Luffy set the mug down, smiling widely as he leaned back and patted his stomach. "That meat was yummy," he said contentedly, ignoring the children. "Meat? Don't tell me the captain, what? What did you do?" Nami laughed to herself as she realized what the children were thinking, and beside her, Zoro grinned wickedly, cheek in hand as his elbow rested on the table. "If you're lucky," Zoro started, giving the children a menacing grin now. "We ate him," he said in a scary voice, the three children screaming in terror. "Old hag," they shouted, looking at Nami with wide bulging eyes as they did, making the navigator's anger flare. "What are you looking at me for?" she yelled back at them angrily. Luffy blinked in confusion, not understanding what was happening. "You just had to say something stupid," Nami yelled at Zoro next, who only shrugged and drank from his mug again. After everything calmed down and was explained, the children relaxed, realizing it had been a joke. When they were told that Usopp had run off on them, they realized now where he must be, telling the three pirates, or in Nami's case, ally for the moment, as much. Seeing as they were curious as to where the long-nosed man had went, they went with the children to the giant house on the hill. Luffy's suspicions confirmed that Usopp had a connection to the place. "Huge," Luffy said in awe as he took in the size of the house. "If our captain ran off at this hour, he'd be here," one of the children, Onion, told them. "Oh, what's he come here for?" Luffy asked curiously, wanting to know what was so important at this place. "Did Usopp live here? That'd be cool. Maybe he would show them around and he could explore the inside of it?" "To lie," one of the other children, Carrot, said as if it were obvious. "That's a bad thing," Nami scolded as she leaned towards the child. "He's not bad, he's great, right?" Pepper asked in defense of his captain, making Nami look at him in surprise. "Yeah, he's great," Onion agreed. "How's that work?" Zoro asked in confusion. Beside him, Luffy was equally confused. He'd never known lying to be a good thing, but the three children weren't lying to him, and that only confused him more. "Kaya, the girl who lives here, is weak, and she's had depression ever since her parents died from an illness a year ago. Even though she has lots of money, she's so sad. So our captain tells his special made-up stories to make her laugh. 'Cause our captain's the best at telling lies," Carrot said, Luffy understanding now. "Oh, so he's great," Luffy determined. "Yeah," the children agreed with smiles. "I like the captain's meddling side," Carrot said. "I like his bossy side," Pepper said next. "I like his exaggerating side," Onion finished. "So that's helped her feel a little better?" Nami asked, also more understanding now than she had been before. "Yeah, a lot better," Pepper said to her. "Great, let's ask her for a ship after all," Luffy announced with a big smile. "It's thanks to Usopp that she's gotten better," Zoro said, arms folded over his chest as he grinned too. "It's tough just to get in," Onion said. "There are way strong guards at the gate," Pepper agreed, everyone looking towards said guards, not noticing that Luffy wasn't with them anymore. "Huh?" the children asked as they looked back to find Luffy gone. "Where'd Luffy go?" Nami asked, hands on her hips as she frowned at the empty spot beside her. "I'll go ask." Luffy told them from the top of the fence that he'd climbed, everyone shouting in surprise. "Wait, you're not gonna—" Zoro started, watching as Luffy's grip tightened on the top of the fence, his captain letting his body fall backward as his arms stretched. "Gum gum." Luffy started, ignoring the fear from the children as they screamed, not knowing of Luffy's abilities. His arms stretched. "He's a monster, pardon." Luffy started shouting in advance to anyone who might be on the other side of the fence. Sabo taught him enough manners to know he shouldn't just barge in without announcing himself first. "Hey, wait, Luffy!" Everyone yelled as they ran towards him, grabbing him in an attempt to stop him, but it was futile. The intrusion, Luffy finished as he flung himself as well as everyone who'd grabbed him into the air and over the fence. "Yahoo!" Luffy yelled out as he began getting closer to the ground. Usopp was visible to him now, the man sitting on a tree branch beside a window. Spotting the rubber teen, Usopp began yelling in fear, eyes wide as he watched the straw-hatted teen grow quickly closer to him. Luckily, he and everyone else landed just a few feet beside him. Zoro and Luffy landed on the paved walkway, Nami in the grass, and the children in the bushes. "That worked great," Luffy said, his voice muffled due to his face being smushed into the now cracked and destroyed walkway. "Did not," Nami yelled to him, her adrenaline making her heart pump quickly and her legs feeling like jelly due to her fear. "Hey, are you alright?" a woman's voice asked in concern. "Yeah, it's okay, Usopp reassured the woman with a nervous smile. "They're new recruits who heard all about me and came from afar to join the Usopp pirates," Usopp told her as he sweat nervously. Luffy didn't need to feel it this time to know the man was lying. Finally, Luffy stood up, readjusting his straw hat on his head as he did. "No, not me, I'm here to ask a favor," Luffy said honestly to the woman who was leaning out of her window to look at him. "A favor, of me?" she asked curiously. "Yeah, we want a big ship." He stopped suddenly as he felt someone with darkness start heading their way, making him frown moments before he heard them speak. "You, there," they said. Luffy turned ever so slightly to see a man in a suit walking over to them with a frown. "What are you doing?" he asked them as he grew closer. Luffy shifted, stepping so that he was in front of his crew and the kids, not wanting to allow the man to get any closer to them than he already was. A quick check told Luffy that the man's aura was a darker gray than Morgan's had been, and he wondered if he was just unlucky to find so many dark aura ED people so soon. "Klahadore," Kaya said from her window, "I don't appreciate you breaking in here without permission." The man Klahadore told them as he adjusted his glasses with the palm of his hand rather than his fingers. Luffy continued to frown at the man as he assessed him. Kaya knew him, that much was obvious, but he wondered how someone as innocent as Kaya, a woman with a bright blue aura, knew a man with such a dark one like Klahadore. The man even had hints of the darkness inside of him, just barely there, but there nonetheless. Things had just gotten interesting. Luffy eyed the well-dressed man carefully, careful to make sure none of the kids got closer to him. The dark aura and feeling set Luffy on edge, and he was debating whether he wanted to outright fight this man or let him be. "Actually, Klahadore, these people are—" Kaya was interrupted as Klahadore adjusted his glasses again, speaking. "That can wait for now. I can hear all about your reasons later," he said while Luffy glanced over to Kaya's window. He didn't feel any empathy, love, or caring in Klahadore towards Kaya, yet his words and tone suggested he felt otherwise. The man began stepping forward again closer to Luffy and the team stiffened, his frown deepening. "Now leave, all of you, or do you have something to say?" Klahadore asked them, stopping in his advances towards them. Luffy refused to speak to the man and behind him Nami was glancing between him and Zoro. Gathering up enough courage, the navigator stepped forward a step. "Actually, we were wondering if we could get your help, we need a ship." "No," Klahadore told her, not waiting for her to finish as he adjusted his glasses again. Nami frowned at that but didn't speak again, Luffy once again making sure that everyone was safely behind him. "Usopp-kun," Klahadore announced, looking to the tree Usopp had been in moments ago, though now the man was nowhere to be seen. "I've heard all about you. You're well known in the village," Klahadore continued as Usopp finally climbed hesitantly back onto the branch, smiling nervously. "Why yeah?" Usopp asked with a nervous chuckle, Kaya watching on worriedly. "I hear you've been on many adventures. Quite impressive for someone so young," he said, and again, the man's feelings contradicted his words. Instead of actually feeling impressed by this, he was filled with annoyance, darkness. "You can call me Captain Usopp, too, since you admire me so much," Usopp called back, standing proudly on the branch. "Captain, huh? I've heard all about your father, as well," Klahadore told him, adjusting his glasses. "What?" Usopp asked, guarded now in contradiction to the smile he'd worn seconds before. Luffy's fists tightened at his side. "Klahadore, stop," Kaya yelled, frowning now as well. "You're nothing but the son of a filthy pirate. Nothing you do will surprise me, but I ask that you stay away from the lady of this house," Klahadore yelled back. Luffy's eyes shadowed by his hat as his own anger began rising. "Filthy?" Usopp asked, his anger visible on his face. "And what's so wrong with that, for someone's parent to be a pirate?" Luffy suddenly asked, surprising everyone as he spoke for the first time since Klahadore had arrived. Klahadore's attention turned from Usopp to Luffy now, frowning. "Everything, of course. Pirates are money-hungry, greedy and will do anything they want as long as they benefit from it. It's only common sense that their children would do the same as well. Usopp, for example, is from a completely different world as Miss Kaya. I'm sure he only hangs around her for money. So, Usopp, how much is it that you want from her?" Klahadore asked, Luffy's blood boiling at the answer. "That's enough, Klahadore, apologize to Usopp-san," Kaya shouted angrily, leaning even more out of her window. "Hey, now, be careful, Kaya," Usopp said worriedly as he noticed just how far Kaya was leaning out now. Unlike Klahadore, Luffy could feel Usopp's concern for the woman, whereas Klahadore had none of that despite his words. "What reason is there to apologize to this savage man, my lady? I am merely stating the truth," he said as if he couldn't comprehend how he was in the wrong. "Liar," Luffy told him, his frown never letting up. Again, everyone looked his way, attention filling the air as they noticed the look on Luffy's face. "And who exactly are you to call me a liar?" Klahadore asked, looking down on Luffy as he adjusted his glasses. Monkey D. Luffy, Luffy said, eyes still shadowed by his hat, only his frown visible. It was Klahador's turn to frown, and Luffy could feel both the recognition and the hint of fear beginning to form in the man. Monkey D. Luffy? You wouldn't happen to be 11,097, Whitebeard Pirate Monkey D. Luffy, would you? He asked, eyeing Luffy carefully now. Behind him, Kaya gasped and Usopp began sweating, jaw-dropping at the words. Yeah, that's me. The teen said, the fear in both Usopp and Klahadore rising while Kaya was merely shocked, though a little worried now. And what is a Whitebeard doing here in the East Blue? I'm sure there are much bigger and better islands to go and torment than this one. Klahadore said carefully, the greed flaring again inside the man. I'm not a part of Pop's crew anymore. I'm starting my own. Luffy said, eyes finally unshadowed as he looked Klahadore in the eyes. There was silence now. Zoro watching Klahadore just as carefully as Luffy was while Nami looked around nervously, not really wanting to get into a fight at the moment. Usopp was still in shock along with Kaya, and the children were glancing between Nami, Zoro, and Luffy, wondering if they should run away from them or not. Is that so? I must ask again that all of you leave the premises immediately, pirates or not. I will not allow you to corrupt Miss Kaya's mind any longer. Klahadore said boldly, despite knowing Luffy was a Whitebeard now knew how strong he was. Another moment passed, Luffy glaring at Klahadore while the man stared back, neither blinking. Eventually, Luffy consented, moving to leave. Nami, Zoro and the children began following suit when Klahadore suddenly spoke again. Honestly, I feel for you Usopp, he said, noticing that Usopp had been about to leave as well. Everyone paused at this, looking back at the man in confusion, Luffy feeling that he was once again lying and not the good kind like Usopp. You must truly hate your great idiot of a father for abandoning you and the village because of his lust for treasure, he said to Usopp. There was a feeling in the man that told Luffy he was trying to rile up Usopp, but he didn't need his ability to feel emotions to figure that one out. Klahadore, Kaya shouted, taken aback by how mean the man was being. Don't you dare insult my father anymore, Usopp shouted in fury, his past shock and fear gone as he jumped off the tree branch, falling safely to the ground thanks to a grappling hook he had in his back. Usopp-san, Kaya called as she leaned to watch Usopp walking over to the man. What are you getting unnecessarily riled up for? Why not simply tell another of your special lies at a time like this? About how your father is really a traveling salesman, or how you're not really related by blood. Shut up, Usopp cried out as he rushed forward, punching Klahadore in the face and knocking the man to the ground, his glasses flying off his face. Luffy wasn't able to tell if he was feeling Usopp's anger or his own, his fists clenched tightly at his sides as he watched, forcing himself not to interfere as he tried taking deep breaths. This time they weren't working as well as they usually did. Captain. The children called out in surprise as Klahadore moved into a sitting position and put his glasses back on. SC, you immediately resort to violence, like father, like son, the man spat, but even though his words were said with anger, Luffy could feel the satisfaction in him, happy that he'd been punched rather than angry like he made it seem. Shut up, Usopp shouted again. I'm proud that my father is a pirate, I'm proud that he's a brave warrior of the sea. You're right. I'm an exaggerator, but I'll never lie about my pride to be related by blood to a pirate. I'm the son of a pirate, Usopp yelled loudly, and finally, Luffy was able to let the anger leave him, instead feeling proud of Usopp, deciding that he was another person he wanted to help like Nami and Zoro and Kobe. Captain. Carrot muttered softly. A pirate, a brave warrior of the sea. That's quite a twisted way of putting things. Klahadore said with a chuckle as he stood back up, dusting his suit off. But you're the undeniable blood. You run around spouting lies, and act violent whenever you're angry. And to top it off, you cozy up to the lady of this house so you can get her fortune, he accused, adjusting his glasses as he looked to Usopp. What? The fact your father is a pirate is more than enough proof that you'd hatch such a scheme, Klahadore yelled, cutting off Usopp, and this time Luffy felt a strange truth to the man's words that made him curious because he was saying them to Usopp, but it felt like he was directing them somewhere else. Damn it, you still won't let up, Usopp yelled as he grabbed Kuro by his shirt, raising a fist in preparation to throw another punch. Stop, Usopp-san, Kaya shouted from her window, dangerously close to falling out. Usopp froze, anger still on his face as he held himself back. Please, no more violence, Klahadore isn't a bad person, he's just trying too hard to do what's best for me, Kaya said, Luffy knowing that she was wrong about that. Not only was this man anything but a good person, but not once during this whole encounter had Luffy felt any affection from the man towards Kaya. It stopped Usopp however, the long-nosed mont's grip loosening on Klahadore's shirt as he let him go, hand falling. Leave this place, never come near this mansion again, Klahadore said as he slapped Usopp's hand away from him. Yeah, I get it. I don't need you to tell me, Usopp said as he dropped his fist now, walking past Klahadore as he left. I'll never come back here again, Usopp finished before disappearing. Usopp-san. Kaya said softly, Luffy feeling her sadness as she watched him go. Suddenly, the kids ran past Luffy and towards Klahadore, making him blink in shock for a second. You stupid butler jerk. Our captain's not that kind of guy, Carrot shouted angrily. Yeah, you stupid head, Pepper shouted, fist raising in the air. Stupid head, Onion echoed. Not liking how close they were to the Dark Ore man, Luffy walked over to them, gently guiding them away from him. Let's go. I don't like stupid heads. Luffy told them, glaring to the man one more time before leaving, the kids walking with him but turning to stick their tongues out at Klahadore. Nami and Zoro followed after them, and it took every ounce of self-control Luffy had not to turn back and deck the butler in the face. Once they'd walked far enough, everyone stopped to sit on the side of the dirt road. Nami sat on the top rung of the wooden fence nearby while Zoro and the kids sat on the ground against it. Luffy, still feeling angry, decided it would be best to go for a walk and look for Usopp, leaving without saying anything to anyone. Smelling the air, it was easy to find the long-nosed man's scent, distinctly smelling of gunpowder and paint. The scent led him through the town and through a wooded area which immediately began calling Luffy's name. Climbing into the first tree he saw, he decided he'd travel that way from now on, Usopp's scent still cleared to him from up there. Jumping from tree to tree his body slowly relaxed until he was grinning, as if everything with Klahadore hadn't happened. When he found Usopp, the teen was sitting on the cliff's edge, watching the ocean. Jumping into the tree closest to the man, Luffy walked out onto a branch above the long-nosed man and let his body hang. Yo! Luffy greeted, face to face with Usopp as he hung upside down. Usopp shrieked in surprise and fear, leaning away from Luffy. Here you are, Luffy said, still hanging. Oh, it's just you, at least say something, will ya? Usopp yelled, calming slightly. So, what, do you want something? Usopp asked, and Luffy could feel that the man was still annoyed and angry from what had happened at the mansion. Not really, Luffy told him, placing his hands on the ground and releasing his legs from the branch. Now balancing solely on his hands, he walked on them a few times before falling. OWW. He whined, despite not actually being hurt. There was a second of silence before Usopp spoke up again, voice resigned. That damn butler. Insulting my dad like that, he said, staring at his lap. Luffy, who now sat in front of him his back to Usopp, nodded in agreement. Yeah, I hate that guy too, he agreed. No matter what anyone says, Yasopp was a great pirate. Luffy continued, frowning as he leaned back on his hands, watching the sea lazily moving below them. Yeah, huh? Usopp asked eagerly, a smile on his face and negative emotions gone as he moved beside Luffy, smiling to him. In this day and age where pirates are everywhere, I'm proud of my old man for living with his life on the line at sea, yet, that bastard stomped all over my pride. He'll pay for this, Usopp said, the frustration returning as he stood, fists clenched at his sides. Silently, Luffy agreed with him, because there was no way he'd leave here now knowing there was someone with a dark aura here. Especially when his new friend Usopp was still here. But you're not gonna go see the girl anymore? Luffy asked instead, turning his head to look at Usopp. The long-nosed man stiffened, his fists unclenching before he crossed his arms and looked away. Why yeah, I dunno. If that butler comes and apologizes to me, I might consider it, Usopp said, Luffy feeling his turmoil. Feeling something else though, he turned, spotting said butler and another guy down on the shore below them. That butler? He asked, pointing to them. Usopp looked, hands on his hips, and nodded. Yeah, that butler. What's that butler doing out here? Usopp shouted in surprise, falling to the ground and pushing Luffy's face into the ground as he did. Ow, that hurts. Luffy whined, voice muffled by the ground, but again, not actually hurt. If anything, it was only mildly uncomfortable. Hey, Django. I told you to avoid doing anything to make you stand out. Yet you go and sleep in the middle of the village. Klahadore said, addressing the man with him, his voice drifting up to the two eavesdroppers. Don't be stupid. I don't stand out one bit. I'm not weird, either. Django said defensively, one leg bent at the knee as he held his open jacket in one hand and his hat with the other. There's someone else with him. A weird guy, Luffy said to Usopp as they watched. Never seen him before. Who is he? Usopp asked, mostly to himself as he continued holding Luffy's head down, though no longer in the ground like he'd done before. So, preparations for the plan are ready, I hope? Klahadore asked, making Luffy frown at the darkness that rose in the man. Of course. We can start anytime. The rich girl assassination plan, Django announced loudly, Usopp's anger rising at the words and Luffy's frown deepening. Even though this Django person didn't even have gray in his aura, he was still going along with this butler guy's plan apparently. One Luffy could tell already was no good. A assassination? Usopp asked. Don't call it an assassination, Django. That has a bad ring to it. Klahadore reprimanded. Oh, right. Accident, it's an accident, Django agreed. Accident? Assassination? What are these guys up to? Usopp asked in a mixture of fear, anger, and worry. We can't simply kill her. Miss Kaya must perish in an unfortunate accident. Don't mess that up, Klahadore told the man as he began walking away. Django sat on a rock, hands now in his pockets. So basically, on your signal, the men and I storm the village and kill the girl. And then you'll get her inheritance. Django said, reciting the plan, to which Klahadore's frustration rose and he turned back to Django. You fool! You do not understand a thing. How would I, an outsider, inherit Kaya's estate? He asked, his own hands in his pockets. You'll work hard to? Django asked, making a pose as he did. Working hard won't amount to squat. Listen, this is the most important thing. Before you kill her, you'll use hypnosis to make Kaya write her will to say, I leave my entire fortune to my butler, Klahadore. He said, pointing a finger in Django's face, his greed and darkness continuing to rise, making uncomfortable. Only then will I inherit her enormous fortune. In a completely ordinary manner. I've spent 3 long years gaining the trust of everyone around me so that it would be unsurprising for her to leave her inheritance to me. He finished, Django standing. 3 years as a butler for that, huh? But you sure scared us back then, Captain Kuro. 3 years ago, you suddenly said you were giving up life as a pirate. In no time flat you set up a subordinate to be your double, then let the world see Captain Kuro get executed. So that was the very beginning of this plan. You truly are Kuro, man of 1,000 plans. Django praised, but Klahadore, or Kuro rather, was only annoyed by it. Don't call me that. I abandoned that name 3 years ago. I now want to obtain great sums of money without the government on my back. In other words, I'm a pacifist. Kuro said with a grin, Django laughing at the words. Luffy didn't know what pacifist meant, but whatever it was, he could feel the lie from Kuro as he said it. Some pacifist you are, killing off an entire rich family for this piece of yours. Django laughed. Hang on now, the father's death was real. I hadn't planned on that, Kuro admitted. Django shrugged, shoving his hands back in his pockets. Well, whatever. It doesn't matter. Anyways, hurry and give the signal. We've been sitting in the waters near here for a whole week now. The men are starting to grow impatient, Django told him. Ah, that reminds me, Kuro said, his good mood changing as he frowned. It seems there's a whitebeard pirate on this island, he said to Django, the Mont's eyes bugging. A whitebeard? On this island? Django nearly screeched. Kuro's frown deepened, but he didn't remark on the outburst. Yes. According to him, he's left the Emperor's crew to start one of his own. As it stands now, it doesn't seem like he should get in the way of our plans, so try and avoid him, will you? Kuro requested, his frown never letting up. Django only blinked, trying to process everything he was hearing, but eventually he nodded quickly. Why, you don't have to worry, Captain Kuro. The guys and I will steer clear of anything and anyone that could stop your plans, Django reassured. Kuro sighed at the overt display of false confidence but nodded. This is seriously bad, Usopp Whisper shouted. Beside him Luffy glanced to the long-nosed man, feeling his turbulent emotions and blocking them the best he could. He didn't like what he was hearing any more than Usopp, and the fact that Kuro had both the dark feeling and aura made him ready to attack him any second. Captain Kuro is said to be the smartest and most brutal pirate of all. Word had it the Navy caught and executed him 3 years ago, but Captain Kuro is alive, as Klahadore the butler. They're gonna attack the village. Kaya's in danger too. Bad. This is seriously bad, Usopp said, voice slowly getting louder and his emotions becoming stronger to the point they were starting to influence Luffy. The team began feeling Usopp's anxiety and fear start taking hold in himself as his hands started shaking slightly. Because he was suddenly so focused on forcing the feelings out, forcing himself to realize it wasn't his anxiety or fear he was feeling, but instead Usopp's, he didn't notice as Kuro and Django both left the shore, leaving Usopp and Luffy alone on the cliff's edge. Usopp was still talking to himself, slowly getting louder, but Luffy forced himself to ignore it. Take deep breaths. Focus on your own emotions, not other people's. Deep breaths. A few minutes passed and Usopp was standing now, announcing how he had to do something, warn the villagers and Kaya. But before he could run off to do so, Luffy stopped him, standing and grabbing the long-nosed Mont's shoulder. Finally, Luffy's second-hand anxiety and fear were gone, instead replaced with his previous anger towards Kuro. Hey, what are you doing? I have to go warn Kaya and the villagers before it's too late, Usopp said worriedly to Luffy, his fear almost taking hold of Luffy again. Don't worry, we'll stop them before they can hurt anyone, Luffy said with a serious face. Wait, how are we going to do that? You heard them, that was Captain Kuro. A real pirate. With a real pirate crew, Usopp shouted, making Luffy pout. Hey, I'm a real pirate too, and it might not be big, but I have a crew too, Luffy said indignantly, crossing his arms over his chest. Usopp blinked at him once before shrieking and backing away from Luffy quickly. I forgot, Clawhead Kuro, he said you were Monkey D. Luffy, that whitebeard pirate everyone was talking about. Usopp shouted in a new fear. realizing Luffy himself was probably a bigger threat than Kuro and his crew combined. Well, yeah, but there's no reason to be scared of me. Luffy pouted again, hating that was always everyone's reactions. Scared? I am not scared, Usopp said, trying to stand tall, but his legs were trembling beneath him. Liar. Luffy deadpanned, making Usopp eep in fear at being found out so easily. It's not like I'm gonna hurt you or anything, you're my friend, and the Kubo guy is a bad guy who I want to fight. Luffy explained in hopes of calming the teen. It didn't seem to do much, but Usopp did at least stop shaking, though he was still very obviously wary of Luffy. Kubo? You mean Kuro? Of course, he's a bad guy. We just overheard his plan to kill Kaya Ak. They're gonna kill Kaya. We have to go stop them, Usopp shouted, the conversation going in circles now. I already said we will. Geez, don't you know how to listen? Luffy asked in annoyance, huffing as he grabbed Usopp's wrist and began dragging him towards where he could smell Nami and Zoro. As they walked, Usopp continued sputtering out nonsense, trying to free his wrist from Luffy's grip, but to no avail. By the time they were walking down the road, Luffy knew his friends were on. Usopp had stopped struggling as was allowing himself to be dragged, though he hadn't stopped talking nonsense the entire time. Oh, Luffy, you're back, Nami said as she hopped off the fence. Captain. The children called as they ran over to Usopp happily. Luffy let go of the teen's wrist at that, trusting he wouldn't run off now, and walked over to Zoro and Nami. So you were with that guy then, Zoro said, he and Nami having guessed as much earlier. Yup. We heard that butler guy was a bad guy, so we're gonna beat him up, Luffy said to the two, only confusing them. Wait, what? What butler guy? Klahadore, Nami asked, trying to figure out who they were supposedly going to beat up and why. Yeah, but his name isn't Klaha whatever, it's actually Kudos, Luffy told them, Usopp face palming behind him. Kuro. His name is Captain Kuro, the man of 1,000 plans, Usopp said. The children weren't there anymore, but that didn't matter to Luffy, or Nami and Zoro for that matter, as they both raised their eyebrows. Captain Kuro? Nami asked in surprise, having heard of the man herself. I thought he died a few years ago, Zoro said in confusion. Yeah, but he didn't. That's not the point. The point is, he's a bad guy, so I'm gonna beat him up before he can hurt the villagers and that girl in the big house, Luffy said, wondering why everyone cared so much about the details. Now hold on a second, okay, so that butler is actually a pirate, but he's been working as their butler. Why? And why are you beating him up now? Nami asked, not understanding. As much as she hated pirates, Klahadore, or Kuro, didn't seem to be causing any harm here. In fact, no one even knew he was a pirate. He's planning on killing Kaya and stealing her fortune. His crew's on their way here once he gives the signal and they're gonna attack the village, Usopp told them worriedly. Okay, let me get this straight. So Klahadore, Kaya's butler, is actually a pirate captain named Kuro. Nami started, Usopp and Luffy nodding. And his plan this whole time was to take Kaya's money, Zoro said next, the two nodding again. So he's going to kill her and attack the village, Nami continued, her WDDING. And all we have to do is beat them up and stop them. Zoro finished, Luffy and Usopp nodding once more. Alright, I'm in, Zoro said with a shrug, Luffy smiling at that. So what's the plan? Nami asked with a sigh, not seeing any way around this. She didn't want anyone getting hurt, and if that meant they had to fight some pirates, then so be it. Besides, think of all the treasure she could get. Luffy laughed, grinning widely as he put his hands behind his head. No clue, he said, despite the situation they were in. Nami and Zoro facepalmed at this while Usopp watched them with wide eyes, not having expected this. You guys are going to fight with me? Why? Usopp asked, trying to fight tears from forming. I already told you, they're bad guys, and I like you, so of course I'll help you, Luffy said as if it were obvious and really it should be by now. He had told him this a bunch of times before. Yeah, and scared is written all over your face, Zoro said to him. And me, scared? I'm perfectly okay with lots of bad guys or whatever, because I'm Captain Usopp, brave warrior of the sea, he boasted, though his legs were shaking. Damn it. This isn't a show. These are Kuro's pirates we're dealing with, of course I'm scared, what's wrong with that? I don't want your sympathy. You guys can leave, Usopp shouted to them. We ain't laughing, we're helping cause we want to and you're a good guy, Zoro said, annoyed that Usopp wasn't getting it. As if we'd risk our lives because of sympathy, Luffy told him, equally annoyed. This seemed to finally reach Usopp as he stared at them, legs stopping in their shaking as the tears came back, this time falling down his face. Oh, you guys. Usopp cried. But I called dibs on all the treasure, Nami yelled. Luffy laughing at that and Zoro smiling. With that, Usopp stood taller, hands on his hips as he grinned. No problem, in that case, Captain Usopp knows exactly what we can do. It's still early, which means we have time to prepare. The ship still needs to get here, and that means they'll have to dock at the beach, but we'll be ready for them. he boasted, Zoro and Nami listening in interest while Luffy watched with wide eyes. Now, here's the plan, Usopp said as he turned to the slope leading towards the village, walking over to it while everyone else followed. Alright, they're going to attack from this shore at daybreak. But the only route into the village is this one slope. Everything else is cliff, making it tougher to come through. In other words, if we can defend this slope to the death, the village won't get attacked, he explained, walking up the slope with the three until they were at the top. Oh, that's easy, Luffy said cheerily. Talking about it is, but the rest depends on our strength. What can you guys do? Usopp asked them because he didn't really know the three all that well. They'd only met earlier that morning after all, and the only thing he really knew about them was that they were pirates, and in Luffy's case, he was a notorious criminal. He tried to will away the fear as he remembered that, tried reminding himself that Luffy was, thankfully, on his side. Cut. Stretch. Steal. I can hide, Usopp said after everyone gave an answer. You're gonna fight. The three yelled at Usopp who paled, tears forming as he sweat. I'm just kidding. Geez, Usopp cried, though Luffy felt the lie. Sometime later, the four were admiring the work they'd done. In front of them, there were 3 barrels spilling oil from them, slicking the slope up to the point that anyone unlucky enough to step on it would slip and fall instantly. Alright, perfect, Usopp said with a smile, hands on his hips. Now they won't be able to climb up this slope, thanks to all this oil we've laid out here. We'll let him slip and slide on this slope, then beat the crap out of him while they flail about. Usopp grinned, obviously pleased with his work. Oil, huh? Nami asked, she and Zoro moving closer to it. No matter what, we will protect this slope, Usopp said. Conversely, let's just hope that none of us slip down there, Nami said. Luffy, who was sitting on the ground near the oil, began carefully stepping on the oil, testing it. It'd be like diving right into an ant-lion pit, the navigator told them. I'm amazed you came up with this, Luffy said, turning his head to address Usopp. But of course, when it comes to plans and slingshots, I'm utterly confident, he boasted, crossing his arms over his chest and standing tall. Everyone smiled to him at his words, finding it nice to see the man when he wasn't so scared all the time. Well anyway, it's still early in the morning. They won't be here until daybreak tomorrow, right? Zoro asked, Usopp nodding. Then we should make sure that no one comes over here and slips down there before then, the swordsman said, sitting against the cliff wall as he did. You're right. We should set up a watch, that way we can make sure Kuro himself doesn't find this or anyone from the village, Nami agreed. I can stay first, Zoro offered, eyes closing as he rested against the wall. I'll go next. Luffy, you can go after me and then Usopp. We'll switch off every 2 hours. Nami decided, everyone nodding in understanding. Bye Zoro. See you later, Luffy said with a smile and a wave as he stood up, leaving with the others. Zoro nodded their way before closing his eyes, relaxing further against the cliff wall. Well, what now? Luffy asked after a minute of walking. Well, I'm going to go look around for a bit. It'd be a good idea to think about restocking the boats with food before we leave here, and seeing as you and Zoro don't have money of your own, I'll have to pay for it. Of course, with a small fee. You understand, right? Nami asked Luffy sweetly, and he could feel the rising greed, the almost ill intentions despite her nice-sounding words. But he shrugged it off, more excited over the prospect of free food. Yeah, he told her, Nami grinning widely at that. Leave it to me then. See you guys later, she told them as she turned her course towards the village. With the woman gone now, it was only Usopp and Luffy left, and because of that, Luffy was focused solely on the long-nosed man's emotions, the man's worry and fear rising again and making him sigh. You don't have to be so scared all the time, you know, Luffy told him, hands behind his head and stance casual as he walked. Usopp looked to him in surprise, blinking. Scared? What makes you say that? Usopp asked hesitantly, trying to smile and sound normal but failing miserably. I can feel it. You don't have to be scared of me. Or those pirates. We'll fight them all and keep everyone safe. Luffy said confidently as if he knew for a fact what the outcome of this fight would be. Honestly, he kind of did. Knowing that it was extremely unlikely that he'd find anyone too threatening in the East Blue, the weakest of the seas. You can feel it? Usopp asked in confusion, not having expected that to be Luffy's reasoning for knowing. He knew that sometimes he wasn't the best at hiding his emotions, lying desperately to hide it instead, but Luffy hadn't said that he saw it, he said he'd felt it. Yeah, your fear, and your worry. Oh, and I guess your confusion now too. Luffy said, having no qualms about sharing this with the man. What do you mean? How can you feel that? Usopp asked, wondering if Luffy was lying to him, but if he was, it was extremely convincing. Wait, hadn't the news about Luffy been that he was crazy? A mental hospital escapee? I just can. That doesn't matter though. What matters is it's alright. Everything's going to be fine. Luffy said reassuringly. Despite the words though, Usopp couldn't help but still feel that way, skeptical of Luffy's so-called ability to feel his emotions. So is it just my emotions you can feel? He asked instead, momentarily forgetting about the fact that Luffy was a big bad pirate, forgetting the village was going to be attacked by tomorrow morning. It was NTION, even if it was a big elaborate lie from the straw-hatted man. Or conversely, a story from a crazy man. Either was a valid option at this point. Nah, I can feel everyone's emotions. Zoro's, Nami's, yours, those kids, Kaya's, Kumo's, even him. Luffy said, naming people on his fingers before pointing to a villager that they were walking past. What's he feeling now then? Usopp asked curiously. Even if he didn't believe it, he wanted to keep the conversation going, to keep the distraction going. Calm. Happy. A little annoyed about something. I think it's directed towards someone he knows, Luffy said, head tilting as he read the man's emotions. Usopp had to admit, Luffy was invested in this. What about them? Usopp asked, pointing to a woman that was sweeping the stoop of her home. Oh, she's annoyed too. Maybe she's annoyed at the guy then? Nay, Usopp. Do they know each other? Luffy asked, recognizing the similar emotion in the two and the fact it was both directed to people they knew. Yeah. Lucky guess. Usopp said, eyebrows furrowing in even more confusion at the accurate assumption. It wasn't proof or anything though. After all, it was a small village. It was only natural people would know each other. She. I think they got into an argument or something. It's not my business though. Marco always told me that people's emotions are their own and I shouldn't tell others about them, but that was mostly because he didn't like when I told people he was lying. Luffy said with a fond smile, looking to the sky. Marco? The long-nosed man asked, not recognizing the name. Not to mention, it was another piece to this strange story lie that Luffy was telling him. Sure, he told fancy stories to Kaya all the time, but rarely did he add anyone else into them, especially people with names, because if you forgot the name or used a real person it was that much easier to be caught up in the lie. Yeah, you know, Marco the Phoenix, he was my ship brother back on Pop's crew. Everyone always asked me if he was lying about certain things, and he got annoyed when I told them so he said I couldn't do that anymore because it was an image of primary, Luffy said, confusing Usopp. Image of primary? He asked, not understanding what that meant. Oh, wait. Maybe it was invision of posture? Luffy asked to himself, never remembering the correct wording. Image. Envision. Invasion? Usopp asked, trying to guess the first word. Yeah, Luffy said excitedly. Invasion of privacy? Was that it? He asked, again receiving an excited nod from Luffy. Yeah, he told me it was an invasion of privacy so I shouldn't tell people what others are feeling. You didn't believe me though. Well, you still don't, but I thought you might if I told you. Luffy said with a shrug, not taking it personally that the man wasn't believing his story. What? Of course I believe you, Usopp said nervously, shocked that Luffy had figured that out. He thought he'd played the part of a believer pretty well, but apparently not. Liar, Luffy said with a smile, laughing lightly to himself. Usopp gaped at him, not sure how to respond for a moment. Wait, so you can feel people's emotions, but lying isn't an emotion, Usopp said, trying to find the flaws now so Luffy would crumble and tell him it was all a lie. No, but people don't feel genuine when they tell lies, so I always know when they're lying, Luffy said as if it were obvious. Usopp narrowed his eyes at that, getting an idea. I'm a millionaire, he said with a straight face and tone, Luffy's smile growing at the words. Liar. Alright, maybe that one had been a bit obvious, but he would surely catch Luffy now because there was no way he could really feel his lying. My favorite color is red, he said next, liar. My favorite food is mushrooms. Liar, you hate them. How did you know that? Usopp asked in surprise, not having expected the last bit of detail. Because you felt like you did. Duh. Luffy said as if he were stupid for not realizing that. Usopp blinked, and a small part of him began to believe Luffy now. You know, my mom, she's waiting for me. I should go check on her, Usopp said nervously now, smiling and pointing over his shoulder because honestly he was getting a little scared now. Luffy pouted at that, arms falling to his side. If you didn't want to hang out anymore you could just say so. I told you, I know you're lying. Luffy said, a bit sad that Usopp wasn't believing him. This made the man in question stiffen, heart in his throat as he gaped at Luffy, freezing in place. But, that's not possible, Usopp almost shouted, because, after all of that, Luffy had gotten every answer right, even things that he'd have no way of knowing about Usopp after only knowing him for this short period of time. Yes, it is, Luffy told him in response. He was living proof that it was possible. And no, people aren't supposed to be able to feel other people's feelings. It's unnatural, Usopp said, his eyes still wide and legs shaking slightly. That's not nice, Luffy muttered quietly as he frowned. Maybe telling Usopp hadn't been as good an idea as he'd first thought. Usopp was at a loss for words, not sure how to respond as he paled. What was he saying? Was he trying to get himself killed? It was so easy for him to forget that not only was Luffy a pirate himself, but he was a white-beard pirate. He'd had a bounty on his head for years now, and the Marines hadn't caught him or his brothers once since they'd escaped the mental hospital. Yet, here he was, practically insulting the man and asking to be attacked. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." Usopp stopped talking again, trailing off as he found it hard to form words. His voice was at a slightly higher pitch than normal, his skin almost ashy compared to its usual color, and his legs much more visibly shaking now. "It's fine. You're scared and I shouldn't have told you about it. Sabo and Ace said normal people get scared of things they don't really understand, so it's my fault. Sorry. See you later, Usopp," Luffy said, his frown never leaving his face as he began walking away from him, his movements much slower and somber compared to earlier. Usopp could only watch him walk away because for as bad as he felt, that man walking away was still a dangerous criminal that could turn on him at any moment. That didn't stop the guilt from forming inside him, however. After his talk with Usopp, Luffy didn't really know where he was going to go, but it didn't matter to him. He walked through the village undisturbed, the villagers' peaceful and happy emotions filtering to Luffy as if trying to make him feel better. Usually, that would work, because Luffy has a low self-control when it comes to resisting the temptation to let the good feelings in. Now, however, he held himself back. Maybe he'd done it subconsciously, almost like an autopilot, because he'd been told time and time again not to let in good feelings seeing as he was naturally a happy person, and letting in more of the emotions would normally mean he became too excitable. Because he wasn't letting them in now though, it meant he was left to feel the sadness, the slight pang of hurt you get in knowing someone doesn't like you. He didn't blame Usopp, he couldn't, because it wasn't the man's fault that he was scared of Luffy. It wasn't his fault Luffy wasn't normal. It wasn't his fault Luffy had told him about his abilities. It was Luffy's own fault, and that was it. There was no one else to blame for it but himself. Well, there was also the facility that he could blame, but that was self-explanatory by now. On the opposite side of the village, Luffy reached the other slope similar to the one they just finished trapping for the pirates and walked along the cliff to sit on its edge. He could see his and Nami's boats still sitting in the water, this having been where they docked, and was reminded of only a few hours ago when he, Zoro, and Nami had landed on the island and met Usopp. He quickly pushed that thought away though, not wanting to think about anything right now. Looking to the ocean, he took in a deep breath, letting the salty air filter into his lungs and bring him back to days of sitting on the Moby. Ace, Sabo and his many ship brothers all around him, and Pops sitting in his throne of a chair nearby. Closing his eyes, he could almost picture himself back there, and when a breeze blew past him, he found himself smiling. If he had been rocking, then it would be exactly like he was back there, save for the fact that it was silent here and on the Moby it was always loud. He sat there for a while, eyes closed, imagining he was back on the Moby when he had a thought. Whiskey, Ace, Marco, Pops, and everyone else had always said he could call them at any time to just talk. Whiskey especially had said he might experience something that he'd want to talk about, and he was thinking of taking the nurse up on that offer. After all, who better to talk to than the person he'd been telling his every thought and feeling to for the past 3 years of his life? Looking back towards their boat, Luffy decided to do just that. Seeing as he was rubber and didn't need to worry about breaking his bones, Luffy jumped off the cliff edge, not hearing the shriek of terror behind him over the wind in his ears as he landed safely on the sandy shore below him. Because of this, he continued onto the boats without stopping. Once he'd climbed onto his and Zoro's tiny boat, he went over to his bag, rummaging inside of it for the mini den he knew was in there, finding it quickly and smiling at the familiar white mustache it wore. Waking it up, he began calling, finding that a smile was quickly forming on his face at the thought of talking to his family again. It hadn't been all that long since he'd separated from them, but it was long enough that he'd begun to miss them. The snail rang for a few seconds before someone answered, Luffy's smile widening at it. "Who's this?" they asked, which caused Luffy to start laughing cheerfully, already feeling better to hear the familiar voice. "Haruda, it's Luffy," Luffy answered, the snail's eyes widening and blinking before breaking out into a smile of its own. "Luffy, how are you? What's up? Is something wrong?" Haruda asked, talking quickly and making Luffy laugh more, feeling the muffled excitement coming from the snail, or rather, Haruda. "Nothing's wrong, I just wanted to talk to Whiskey," he said, trying to fight the frown as he remembered the reason for the call. "Whiskey? Yeah, alright. You're good though, right?" Haruda asked, and Luffy could faintly hear now that he was moving, probably walking to Whiskey now. Luffy hummed, not saying anything more than that. He could feel a skepticism in Haruda, telling the team that the commander didn't believe him, but he didn't press it. "How's your adventure going so far, then?" he asked instead, Luffy's smile more genuine now as he thought about something else. "Great, I already have a crew member, too. His name's Zoro, he was a pirate hunter. But now he's a pirate. We're also traveling with a navigator, but she doesn't like pirates so she didn't want to join, but that's okay," Luffy told Haruda, proud of his two new friends. "Oh, I'm happy you're not sailing aimlessly and have a proper navigator. That sure will ease Ace's worrying. Although a pirate hunter turned pirate. Can't say I've heard that before," Haruda said with a laugh, Luffy joining in. "Yeah, Zoro's really cool. He's a swordsman, like Vista, and he fights with 3 swords, Luffy said, stars in his eyes as he thought about how cool his crew member was. Huh, a three-sword-wielding pirate hunter turned pirate and a navigator who doesn't like pirates tagging along with said pirates. You sure do attract a strange bunch, Luffy. Haruto told him. I also met this guy named Usopp. He's got a long nose and lies a lot. Oh, and he's Usopp's kid, from Shanks' crew, again. Luffy didn't hear the squeak from the cliff he'd previously jumped off of, focused entirely on his conversation with Haruto. Usopp's kid? Really? Man, Luffy, I'm beginning to think Thatch was right. You do get yourself into the strangest situations. Haruto said, the snail imitating a headshake at the words. Anyways, I'm at the infirmary now, which means I'm gonna have to say goodbye for now, Haruto said as a faint knock was heard. Right. See you later, Haruto. Tell Ace, and Pops, and Marco, and Thatch, and Izo. I get it, Lou. Haruto laughed, making Luffy smile again. Tell everyone I said hi, Luffy told him, the snail nodding. Will do. With that, there was a muffled conversation as Haruto told, presumably Whiskey, that Luffy was on the line and wanted to talk. Within seconds, the snail was handed over to the nurse, the expression changing to one of worry. Luffy, is everything alright? Whiskey asked, and Luffy wondered why that was everyone's first question. I just wanted to talk, Luffy said, and even though he was still smiling, it wasn't as big as before. Whiskey seemed to pick up on this, the snail's expression softening. Alright, let me move to my office, she said, and again Luffy waited patiently as he heard the nurse walk, but shortly after it was quiet. What did you want to talk about? She asked him now, the snail's expression still soft and gentle, caring and worry coming to Luffy from the nurse. I haven't had any bad days, and I only had one nightmare so far. I wrote about it and stuff, and I was fine. I'm kind of in the middle of an adventure right now, but we're waiting to beat up these bad pirates, and the captain has the dark feelings. It's not really that strong, but his color's dark too, and he's always feeling the bad type of greedy. Luffy started seeing as that had also been bothering him still as well. Are his feelings strong enough to influence your own? Pops isn't there, which means you can't filter in more warmth to push the dark feeling away, and I'm assuming whoever you're with so far doesn't possess the warmth, she said. No, I've met some people, and I have a new crew member, but none of them have the warmth. I was able to keep it from bothering me too much, but while we were talking to him the feelings got stronger and I was really uncomfortable. We left a little bit after that though, so I was able to calm down, but I was getting really angry and my deep breathing wasn't working like it usually does. Luffy told her with a pout, not liking that the BD like it usually did. Deep breathing doesn't always work, you know that. As much as I wish I had a technique you could use that would always work, I don't. I'm happy to hear that you still practice deep breathing though, and even though it didn't work for you then, I'm sure it's helped you other times, right? She asked, Luffy nodding. Yeah, he mumbled. See, it's not always going to work, but it's good to try regardless. For the times it doesn't work, you're going to have to work hard to remember calming thoughts. Remember mantras? She asked, Luffy nodding again at the word. Yeah, the things you say over and over, he said. That's right. You could start telling yourself mantras while you take your deep breaths and that could help. Maybe something like, I'm in control of my own feelings, or, these feelings aren't my feelings. Maybe even something else, but whatever it is, you can start telling yourself this, and maybe you'll find it to be as effective as your deep breathing, she said. Luffy smiled at that, happy that he had a plan for the future. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about? She asked, which led Luffy to remember Usopp, making him frown again. He hummed quietly, leaning against the railing of his boat, eyes shadowed by his hat. It's alright, Luffy, remember, this is at your own pace. You can talk to me about it if you want, but I understand it may be difficult for you, the nurse said, taking in the snail's imitation of Luffy's expression and realizing the boy was going through something. Luffy remained silent as he thought it over because he really did want to talk to Whiskey about it, but it was different from anything he'd talked to her about. Usually, he'd talk to her about bad feelings in other people or bad memories or nightmares he had, but he'd never talked to her about someone not liking him. He'd never really had to deal with it before, because even though Marines didn't like him, and most people were scared of him, he'd never had someone who was becoming his friend suddenly dislike him because of his abilities. I met this guy. Luffy began softly, Whiskey patiently listening. He's nice and really cool, and I've heard about him before. He's Usopp's son, from Shanks' crew, and we've hung out a lot today. The pirate captain with the bad feeling is gonna attack his village, and I told him I'd help him stop them, cause I don't like the captain guy anyway, so I wanted to. Luffy told her. I thought we were starting to become friends, but we were walking and talking and stuff and I could tell when he was lying, so I said so, but he wanted to know how I knew, and I told him that I'd felt it. He didn't believe me and started asking me questions about it, and I think he realized I wasn't lying to him, but then he got scared of me, Luffy said, trailing off. I left, cause I didn't like that I was making him scared, he finished, shifting. Have you told anyone else about your abilities? She asked curiously, Luffy shaking his head. No, I'm not hiding them, because I don't want to hide it from anyone, but I haven't brought it up. I think Zoro, my swordsman, realized something was weird once, but he never asked about it, Luffy said, remembering when he'd had a similar conversation with Zoro about how he'd known Buggy wasn't down the first time, telling the man he had felt it. "So this is the first time you had someone you were beginning to view as a friend dislike you due to your abilities," Whiskey said with a sigh, Luffy nodding. "Friendship is a finicky thing, Luffy. Especially when it's fresh and brand new. You two are still getting to know each other, and I know you haven't had much of a chance to make friends, especially with people your own age. Sometimes people don't take well to things they deem unnatural, and unfortunately, your abilities fall under that category. Sometimes, no matter what we do or how we try, there are just some people that won't like us," she said to him, Luffy nodding in understanding but still bummed about the loss of a friendship. On the other hand, there is a chance that you merely overwhelmed him. Give him some time, let him process what you've told him, and if he's as cool and good a person you told me he was, then there's a chance he'll be able to see past the things you can't control. It's as you and I tell Ace time and time again, people that don't like you for things you can't control aren't worth your time, she said, smiling at the end. Luffy smiled as well because he could remember the many times he'd said that to his brother after he'd had too many thoughts and too much anger over people judging him due to who his father was. Thanks, Whiskey," Luffy said, smiling softly to the snail. "It was no problem, Luffy. I hope things work out for you. Oh, and kick that pirate captain's ass, will you?" she asked good-naturedly. Luffy's smile widened and he laughed softly. "Right, talk to you later, Whiskey," he told the nurse. "Goodbye, Luffy." Usopp sat in stunned silence, peering over the cliff to Luffy who was sitting in his boat, the mini den in his hand falling asleep. When Luffy had left earlier, he'd stood in stunned fear in the middle of the dirt road for a good few minutes before he'd been able to shake himself out of it. He'd wanted to run after Luffy, but his mind continued to remind him that that would be detrimental to his health, that it would be better if he left the dangerous pirate alone. Every time he thought that though, he couldn't help but feel guilty until ultimately, he decided he would keep an eye on the man. After all, it wasn't like he would show himself. He had to make sure Luffy didn't do anything to hurt the villagers, that was all. So he'd shakily followed Luffy to the shore that the pirate had docked at earlier that morning. He hid in a bush, watching Luffy's back as he sat on the cliff edge, facing the sea. Again, he tried not to feel bad, tried to ignore the thoughts in his head telling him that he was a horrible person for judging Luffy so much even after the teen had been so nice to him. He was broken from the circling thoughts when Luffy stood and jumped off the cliff. Shrieking in fear, Usopp scrambled out of the bushes. Had Luffy felt so bad after their encounter that he'd commit suicide? If so, Usopp would feel absolutely horrible, but as he peered over the cliff edge he saw Luffy walking away without so much as a limp. Breathing a sigh of relief, he watched as the teen went to his boat, rummaging in a bag there before pulling out a mini den. Dread filled him as he watched and heard the call being made. Oh no, was he going to call the Whitebeards here? Because he hadn't been nice? Usopp began praying to every god he knew the name of, telling them how sorry he was for judging a book by its cover, and how he'd never do so again so long as Luffy didn't call the full force of Whitebeard here because of his poor reaction. Again, he was filled with relief when he heard Luffy chatting with someone named Haruta, telling him about his adventures so far, even going so far as to mention him as well. That had made him squeak in surprise, thinking that, surely, this was where he was going to tell them how mean he'd been and demand they come attack the village in retribution. That still didn't happen though, and instead the snail changing to this whiskey person. Usopp's earlier disbelief in Luffy's so-called abilities was tested again as he listened to the two talk about Luffy feeling Kuro's emotions, making him realize that maybe the teen wasn't lying. But that was crazy, right? It didn't seem that way though, because as he listened more, which he knew he shouldn't do, but continued doing anyway, this whiskey person asked if he'd told anyone else about his abilities, and seeing this person talk so confidently about the abilities made Usopp begin to believe it more. Neither Luffy nor Whiskey knew he was listening in, so why keep the lie going? What would they gain from it to pretend Luffy could feel other people's emotions? Usopp WND, if he didn't feel bad about himself earlier, he definitely did now. Hearing the woman talk to Luffy in such understanding, hearing her mention how Luffy'd never had friends his age, made him realize how insensitive of the teen's feelings he'd been. The more he heard, the more he began seeing Luffy as a normal person, just like him. Sure, he may or may not have weird abilities, the jury was still out on that one, but all Luffy had done so far was be kind to Usopp, and he hadn't been kind back. Stepping off the boat, Luffy slowly began walking towards the slope to head back to the village. After his talk with Whiskey, he felt a little better, but now he didn't know what to do. He didn't want to go bug Usopp. Whiskey had told him he might need space and Nami was busy getting supplies, so he didn't want to bother her either. He could go hang out with Zoro and keep watch for anyone coming. Finding that that was the best idea, he decided he'd do that. Before he could even reach the top of the slope though, he realized that someone was nearby, not having noticed before. Usopp, what are you doing here? Oh, wait, space, I'm supposed to give him space. Never mind, Luffy said, trying to pretend as if he hadn't noticed the man. From the nearby bushes atop the cliff, there was an eep as Usopp stood in surprise. How'd you know I was there? he asked, and even though he just told himself he'd be nicer to Luffy, try and give him a shot, here he was, scared and timid again. I felt Luffy trailed off because again, he knew the man was still scared of him. He could feel it and he didn't want to scare him anymore. It didn't seem to matter though as Usopp realized what he'd been about to say, hesitating at the realization. How long were you there? Luffy asked instead, curious as he hadn't noticed earlier. To be fair, though, he'd been a bit preoccupied to keep track of his surroundings. And not long at all. Actually, I just got here, Usopp said confidently to Luffy, a smile trying to force its way on his face. Leah, again, Luffy stopped himself, remembering that Usopp didn't like his abilities. He frowned, annoyed with himself that he couldn't remember these things before he started talking. Oh, right. Well, actually, I was there the whole time. Sorry. Usopp admitted once Luffy called him out again, even if he'd stopped himself. Besides, Usopp thought that it'd be best to admit it and hope the inevitable beating the pirate gave him wasn't too bad. His legs were shaking again as Luffy blinked at him in surprise. I'm still not going to hurt you. Anyways, I'll go sit with Zoro then, so I don't bother you. Sorry. Luffy told the man, shocking Usopp at the apology because shouldn't he be the one doing that? Luffy started walking again, most likely to Zoro like he'd said, but Usopp forced himself to speak up instead. Hey actually, why don't we hang out? Usopp asked, trying to channel his confidence to hide his fear. But couldn't Luffy feel his fear? So was it useless to pretend? Really? Luffy asked, now the one who was surprised as he turned back to Usopp with wide eyes. Seeing this, Usopp straightened, smiling as big as he could. Yeah, I thought, why not, we're both not doing anything, and sure, I was a little scared of you at first, but you're not so bad, Usopp said, finding that he meant his words more than he thought he would. Luffy's smile widened at that and he almost began jumping in place in excitement. Yeah, what should we do? Oh, we could go eat, or play a game, or explore. Usopp's sweat dropped as the now hyperactive teen began listing different activities they could do together, and he began wondering just what he'd gotten himself into. The day passed rather quickly for the group of four. Usopp and Luffy hung out up until Luffy had to take his turn for watch, and by then, Usopp found his fear of the man slowly fading away, realizing that Luffy was a pretty fun guy to be around, pirate or not. When night came they changed the schedule. 3 sleeping nearby the slope they'd booby-trapped while 1 stayed up on guard. They would do so for 2 hours before getting the next person, and an hour before daybreak they would all get up and keep guard together. It's almost daybreak. They'll be coming soon, Zoro said to the others who were stretching and yawning, the skies slowly lightening thanks to the rising sun. Zoro had been the last on guard, so he was wide awake whereas the others were only just waking up. The 4 of them stood on that slope, waiting as it got brighter and brighter, yet there was no sign of ships. Where are they? The sky's all bright now. What's the deal? Luffy asked, not feeling anyone getting closer like he had expected. Maybe they overslept or something, Zoro asked with a raised eyebrow. No, they'll definitely show up. Lots of him, Usopp said confidently. Nami suddenly perked up, cupping her ears as she walked forward. Say, it might just be my imagination, but I hear yaw coming from somewhere, she said, listening carefully. The 3 guys looked around as if expecting to see something new, but they couldn't. Yeah, I definitely hear it, Nami confirmed. And now that you mention it, Usopp muttered. What is it? Zoro asked. There's a place just like this to the north too, Usopp yelled, holding his head as he began sweating. You don't suppose? He trailed off and Luffy took a step towards him. You mean this is the wrong shore? Luffy asked incredulously. This is where they had their secret meeting, so I just assumed, Usopp said with a worried look on his face, his emotions in turmoil again. Hey, let's hurry. They're gonna get into the village, Luffy said urgently. Right. If you run straight north from here, you'll get there in 3 minutes. The terrain there is almost exactly the same, so we just need to stop them at the slope, Usopp told them, Luffy listening carefully. Don't worry, we'll do it somehow, Luffy assured him before Nami had a sudden realization. Oh no, the north shore is where our boats are. They're gonna take our treasure, she shrieked. Don't worry, I'll be there in 20 seconds, Luffy told them, crouching and letting his blood begin pumping faster, steam rising off of his body, and his skin turning pink. What the? Usopp asked in shock, everyone watching with wide eyes. Gear second, Luffy muttered, and in a blink, he was gone, leaving the 3 stunned on the slope. Thanks to his gear second, Luffy was at the north shore within seconds, just as he'd said, and because of that, he was able to see the many pirates congregated at the bottom, all beginning their ascent up the hill. They were all filled with greed and determination as they ran, but Luffy didn't care about any of that as he stood at the top of the slope, glaring at them. Hey, there's someone at the top of the hill, one of the pirates called once they noticed him. Everyone stopped moving as they took in Luffy's figure, and Luffy recognized one of them as the man Kuro had been talking to on the shore. You, they said, looking at Luffy for a minute. Who are you? he asked after a second, not recognizing Luffy. My name's Monkey D. Luffy. I'm not gonna let you attack the village, Luffy yelled to them, remembering his anger towards Kuro yesterday and letting it filter into his glare, some of the pirates stepping away at the intensity of it. You're not going to let us? Oh, I guess we should go then, the man said, the many pirates around him sweat dropping. Captain, we can't just leave, remember? One asked him, the man straightening at that. Ah, that's right, he said as if he'd forgotten what the whole idea for this attack was. Captain, shocking news, another pirate yelled, Django turning at that. Really, that's bad, he yelled. No, it's good, we found treasure in those weird boats, he yelled back, pointing to Nami and Luffy's boats where another pirate was carrying a sack of treasure, showing it to Django. An incredible 1,000,000 berries, he told him. What? Django asked in surprise, Luffy's eyes narrowing. Oi, he yelled to them, everyone turning back to look at him. That's Nami's treasure. Leave it alone, he shouted to them. Django frowned, holding onto his hat. You fool, we're pirates, you know. We're obviously going to take this treasure, he called back. Luffy's glare hardened and he took a deep breath before lowering into another stance. I'm a pirate too, and that's why I'm gonna stop you from taking that treasure and hurting this village, he told them, many scoffing and laughing. You, a pirate? What are you, 15? You're just a kid, a pirate yelled to him. Luffy began to grin at that, hat shadowed by his eyes. And you're all a bunch of old men who decided to attack the wrong island, Luffy said, tone low and menacing, making a few of the pirates worry. Suddenly, behind him, Luffy both heard and felt someone running over and looked to see Usopp, panting and sweating with his slingshot in hand and goggles on. Oh, Usopp, he called, menacing look gone and replaced with a regular smile, making the pirates exhale in relief. Oh Luffy, what was that thing you did? You got here so fast, Usopp said as he put his hands on his knees, panting. It was Gear 2nd. Wasn't it cool? I can move super fast with it, Luffy said with a laugh. Oi, did you forget about us? One of the pirates yelled angrily, making Luffy frown again as he glared to him out of the corner of his eye. They're here, Usopp whispered in fear, taking in the group of pirates below them. You ready to fight, Usopp? Luffy asked the teen, voice low again and all joking gone. Usopp nodded, standing tall again. I am completely ready to fight, he said, and despite this, Luffy could see the man's shaking legs, as well as feel his fear. However, he could also feel the determination in him, the conviction and resolve to stand in the way of these pirates and protect his village. With a small smile, Luffy nodded, lowering into a stance again. Are you two done talking? Never mind, on 1, 2, Django, you two will let us by, Django shouted, holding up a shiny metal ring on a string and letting it swing back and forth in the air. Luffy watched the ring in confusion while Usopp eeped in fear, thinking the ring was a weapon. 1, 2, more running footsteps behind them had Luffy turning to see who else was coming. Jan, who's taking my treasure? Nami shrieked with sharp teeth as she came barreling forward, knocking Usopp over while Luffy sidestepped the woman. Nami, you're here too. I tried telling them it was your treasure, but they weren't listening to me, Luffy told the woman honestly with a smile. Captain, this is no time to hypnotize yourself and let people by, a pirate reprimanded Django while Usopp stood from the ground. That boat's treasure is mine. I won't let you have a single berry, Nami shouted, pointing to the pirates angrily. That hurt, Usopp whined as he brushed himself off. You were in the way of my treasure, Nami said as if it were Usopp's fault. You didn't have to knock me down like that, Usopp said back, Nami frowning and closing her eyes. What are you talking about, after I just saved you, she said indignantly, Luffy watching in confusion. Huh? Luffy and Usopp asked. I forgot to mention it, but don't watch his ring all the way through. He's a hypnotist, Nami said, pointing to Django who frowned back at her. Hypnosis? Usopp shrieked, looking to the man as well. Hypotenuse? Luffy asked, tilting his head in confusion. Hypnosis, idiot. He can make you do whatever he says if you look at the ring, Nami explained, Luffy putting a fist into an open palm in understanding. Oh, so don't look at the ring. Got it, he said with a wide smile, Nami sighing and rubbing her forehead in exasperation. Anyways, what was that thing you did back there? You disappeared, Nami said, still a little surprised by that. Sure, she was able to understand that Luffy was a rubber man and could do some strange, non-normal things, but what did rubber have to do with disappearing as he had done? That was Gear 2nd, he said as if she should know what that meant. As Luffy and Nami talked, Usopp began walking back behind them, slingshot on his shoulder. Alright guys, I'll take command here. Go kick their butts. I'll cover you, he told them, pointing to the pirates who were growing angrier by the second. Right. Go ahead Luffy, Nami said sweetly, her wooden bow staff resting against her shoulder as well as she smiled to the teen. You guys aren't gonna fight too? Luffy asked with a raised eyebrow. There's no way I can take on that huge army. I'm weak you know, Nami said to Luffy, who gave her a look of confusion. But if you fight you'll get stronger, he said as if it were obvious, but Nami wasn't having it. If I fight I'll get hurt, she yelled, Luffy frowning. Nah, I won't let him hurt you, he said, making Nami and Usopp blink. We don't have time to mess with them. Crush him and head for the village men. Django told the pirates, who all cheered, Usopp and Nami stiffening in fear. Here they come, Usopp said as he and Nami took a step back, watching the pirates charge up the slope. Luffy lowered again, fists raised in preparation for a fight. Oh yeah, I have caltrops, Usopp remembered, shoving his hand in his bag. Oh, you do have some good stuff, gimme, Nami grinned, pleased that it didn't seem like she needed to fight at all. The two held a handful each of the spiky metal pieces, lowering as they got ready to throw them. Caltrop hell, Usopp yelled as he and Nami released them on the pirates, Luffy watching in awe. Ow! All of the pirates shrieked and yelled as they stepped on the spikes, or as the spikes landed on their clothing, poking them all. Wow, see, you guys are doing great, Luffy praised. Yes, we got him, Nami cheered, she and Usopp grinning. Now, special attack. Lead star, Usopp called as he pulled his slingshot back, taking aim before firing the pellet into a pirate's face, knocking him to the ground. Bastard, a nearby pirate yelled. Way to go, keep it up now, I'm gonna quit fighting for a bit. Nami praised, patting Usopp on the back. You haven't even fought yet, Usopp screamed as he watched the redhead begin to leave, only to stop short. What is it? Luffy asked as he turned as well. There are caltrops behind us too, she said dejectedly, pointing to the metal surrounding them. You moron. You dropped him there, Usopp yelled, not paying attention to the pirates behind him anymore. Out of the damn way. One of them yelled as they swung their hammer back, jumping in the air and planning on hitting Usopp. Usopp paled, realizing he couldn't get out of the way fast enough, and Nami gasped, having the same realization. Oi! Luffy yelled, swinging his fist back and punching the pirate away from Usopp. Attacking someone's back isn't fair, Luffy told the man with an angry expression, Nami and Usopp both watching with wide eyes. Some of the closer pirates staggered back at the show of strength, but Django looked undeterred. Thanks, Usopp said with large eyes. No problem. I told you I wouldn't let them hurt you. You're a sniper, right? You stay back and cover us. Nami, we're going down there now, Luffy said, looking to the pirates. I already told you. I can't fight, she said shakily, Luffy only grinning. It'll be fine, besides, you can't go anywhere else, right? Those spiky things are in the way, Luffy said, Nami realizing he was right as she looked back to the caltrops. And they still have your treasure, too, Luffy added, spotting the bag that one of the pirates still held near the boats. My treasure, alright, let's do this then, Nami said, lowering and holding her bow staff tightly in her grip. Let's go, guys, Captain Kuro is waiting, he suddenly shouted, the pirates stiffening as they remembered. They're about to fight. Ready? Luffy asked Nami, the girl taking a deep breath before nodding. Pirates began charging up the hill again, swords at the ready. One of them ran right for Nami, swinging the metal weapon towards her which she effectively blocked with her staff. Luffy, after making sure she could handle it, turned his attention to two more pirates heading his way, back bending under the first one's swing and standing on his hands, lifting his feet into the air and kicking the man away before standing again. The second went to attack him next, but he was able to sway out of the sword's way, bringing his fist down on the mon's head, making him crumble to the ground. Looking to Nami, he saw her block another swing from a sword, but the power behind it knocked her back. Before she could fall, Luffy stretched his arm out, steadying her before she could hit the ground. She blinked in surprise, watching as Luffy's arm snapped back to his side, but was forced to face her opponent again as he got ready to attack again. Special attack. Lead star, Usopp yelled again, the pellet hitting Nami's opponent in the face and knocking him back enough that Nami could right herself. Gripping her staff, she swung it back before swinging it forward and into the man's stomach, throwing him to the ground. Hey, you guys, quit bothering with them and get going already, Django yelled in annoyance from where he still stood on the shore. But Captain Django, these guys are strong, a pirate called back, eyeing the three teens wearily. Have you forgotten Captain Kuro's plan? We have a schedule to keep. If anything happens to throw off his plan, he'll kill every one of us, Django yelled, scaring the pirates enough that they got a second wind. Do you understand that? The man asked, the pirates sweating as they looked to each other. Hey now, yeah, hurry to the village. With a roar, the pirates began running again, reaching the top of the slope where they stood. Nami shrieked in fear, because she could barely handle the one pirate, much less the tens of pirates running at her now. Damn it, that's not good. They can't get to the village, Usopp said worriedly, legs shaking again. Luffy, however, didn't look worried in the slightest, instead lowering again and throwing his leg back. Gum whip, he shouted, swinging his leg out and knocking the front row of pirates back, starting a domino effect as they knocked down the next few rows. No longer were the pirates at the top of the slope anymore. Now, they were all knocked back to the shore where Django stood. Usopp paled at Luffy's strength, remembering once more he was a Whitebeard pirate. What is this, Captain Django? Nobody mentioned guys like them were in the village, they said fearfully. Finally, I made it. A new voice said, Nami, Usopp, and Luffy looking to see Zoro there, panting and sweating. Zoro, you made it. Did you get lost? You took forever, Luffy said, realizing Zoro had taken a while. The man was annoyed, and a bubble of guilt and slight fear came from Nami, directed towards Zoro, which confused him further. I didn't get lost, Nami. How dare you kick me down there? Zoro shouted to the woman who squeaked, before laughing nervously and rubbing the back of her head. That was an accident, it couldn't be helped, she tried as Zoro glared at her. Besides, it's better for one person to be saved than for two to stay down there, she said, only making Zoro angrier. Then you should have stayed, he screamed. Night is long gone now. He Captain Kuro, he's short-tempered. Hey men, don't tell me that Brad did you all in? Django asked the fallen pirates around him. Everyone looked back to them, Zoro raising an eyebrow. What's with them? He asked, not having seen Luffy's attack. You well, Luffy kind of kicked them, Usopp explained nervously, eyeing Luffy wearily. Huh, Zoro said, pleased with his captain's strength. Listen, we don't have time to be dilly-dallying here, Django said to the slowly rising pirates, digging in his jacket pocket and pulling out his metal ring. If your enemy is strong, we just need to be stronger. Now watch this ring closely, on 1, 2, Django, you guys'll grow strong. Your wounds will be completely healed, and you will grow stronger and stronger, Django told the watching pirates. What are they doing? Zoro asked. It's hypnosis, he's trying to convince them to be stronger. How ridiculous, Nami told him with a frown. Stronger, stronger, 1, 2, Django, all around him, the pirates who had been struggling to even sit on their knees, suddenly jumped to their feet and roared loudly. One of them even punched the cliffside beside him, cracking it into pieces. No way, Nami exclaimed in shock as the pirates cheered. He gouged out the cliff, Usopp exclaimed in an equal amount of shock. What power, Zoro yelled with a sweat drop. They really did get hypnotized, Nami said next. With that many people that strong, Usopp trailed off, wondering if, even with Luffy, they would be able to take them down. Speaking of, go, crush anyone who gets in the way, Django screamed, pointing to the four standing on top of the slope. The pirates cheered again before running up the hill as fast as they could. You guys get back, Zoro yelled to Nami and Usopp, unsheathing his sword. We'll handle this, he said, referring to himself and Luffy. The two began to scramble behind the swordsman, happy to do as he said, while Zoro and Luffy stood motionless as they watched. Oi, Luffy, Zoro asked, turning to look at the silent teen. He was glaring, a frown on his face, and unmoving. Luffy? He asked, wondering if he was okay. Suddenly, with a roar, Luffy raised his hands in the air. You got hypnotized too, Zoro screamed. Without saying anything, Luffy took off down the slope towards the incoming pirates, Zoro, Nami, and Usopp watching in surprise. What a simple-minded person. I told him not to watch the rain, Nami said from where she stood safely behind Zoro. Roaring again, Luffy held up both fists, throwing them in front of him as fast as possible. Gum gum. Gatling, he screamed, his fists moving so fast it looked like there were multiple of them hitting the pirates. This made them pause, and it wasn't before long that Luffy had knocked them all down again. Damn you, Captain Kuro. You didn't warn us about this, Django said in a mixture of anger and worry. These guys are no ordinary brats, but wait, he said with a bead of sweat running down the side of his face. This guy couldn't be the Whitebeard pirate he told me about, could it? Django asked himself softly, eyes widening in fear at this thought. Meanwhile, the pirates tried getting up again, but Luffy's roar made them realize the danger they were in as all of them quickly began running back down the slope while Luffy chased them. The pirates fell to the ground at the bottom of the slope, but Luffy kept running, right to Django, who began sweating profusely in fear, holding his hat. He crouched, preparing himself for an attack, but Luffy ran right past him, instead heading to the ships. What is he doing? Zoro asked from where he watched. Luffy ran right to the pirate's ship, grabbing onto the black cat figurehead and gripping it in his arms. What's he planning to do? The pirates asked with tears falling, bleeding from wounds all over them. With one more roar, Luffy pulled the figurehead off of the boat, muscles straining at the strength it took. Go, Luffy! Nami and Usopp cheered from behind Zoro, the swordsman watching with wide eyes and a gaping jaw. He's gonna destroy the ship, a pirate screamed fearfully. Holding the entire figurehead in his arms now, Luffy stumbled back with it, turning to glare at the pirates. No, he's not, he's gonna crush us with that. Terrified, the pirates began running back up the slope as Luffy slowly began carrying it their way. Please do something, Captain, Django stiffened, looking around desperately. Crap, crap. This was no time to be gawking, he told himself, turning to watch as Luffy continued growing ever closer. Quickly, he pulled his ring B-wing in front of him. 1, 2, Django, you'll get sleepy. 1, 2, Django, Zoro, Nami, and Usopp watched with wide eyes as suddenly, Luffy's eyes closed and he fell asleep, the figurehead falling on top of him as a result. The pirates screamed as they were hit by the long piece of wood as well, many of them being crushed by it. Nami and Usopp moved up to the cliff itself, Zoro looking at the scene below them carefully. Looks like they're just about wiped out, Nami said. I guess so, Zoro replied with a blank face. Hey, never mind that. Luffy's trapped under there, Usopp said worriedly, thinking the teen might be seriously injured. He won't die, Zoro said confidently, confusing Usopp. Damn that brat. Now the plan's really screwed up. If Captain Kuro caught sight of this, he'd slaughter all of us, too, Django said, teeth chattering in fear as he looked around at all the fallen pirates. Hey, Butchie, come look. This is bad stuff, a new voice said. What the hell? Another asked, Django stiffening in surprise and turning back to the pirate ship. We still have a trump card, come forth, Meowban brothers, he called. At his words, two figures jumped off the ship, landing on the wood from the figurehead and grinning to him. You called, Captain Django? The green-haired man asked. You called? The one with a bell around his neck asked next. Siam. The green one said, standing in a cat pose. And Butchie, the other said, doing the same. Together we are the Meowban brothers, they announced with grins, jumping in front of Django and kneeling. Butchie, Siam. We absolutely must get past this hill, but as you can see, an obstacle is in the way. Get rid of it. Django ordered, the three turning to look at Zoro who stood menacingly at the top of the hill, a sword over his shoulder. Suddenly, the two blanched, stumbling back and sweating. We can't possibly do that, right, Butchie? Siam asked his brother. Yeah, he looks strong, Butchie agreed. Nami, Usopp, and Zoro watched in a mixture of surprise and confusion. And besides, we're just supposed to guard the ship. Yeah, this isn't really our place to fight, Siam and Butchie said, taking another step back towards the ship. What? They're not their trump card, Usopp asked in confusion. Siam, get going already. Django ordered again. Me? Siam shrieked in fear. Hurry, Django barked. Siam and Butchie shrunk back at the harshness, Siam even beginning to cry. Oh okay, I'll go, Siam conceded. He's in tears, what's he trying to do? Nami asked with a raised eyebrow. Why's he making him fight? She continued. As she said this, Siam began crying as he ran up the hill. Hey, you, get ready, I'm gonna scratch you good with these claws, Siam cried, waving his hands in the air. What am I supposed to do? Hey, you, stop or I'll kill you, Zoro said in an attempt to stop the man before he had to hurt him. As Siam grew closer, his entire demeanor changed in an instant. No longer was he crying, instead, he was grinning and moving confidently towards Zoro. If you can, he growled, surprising the three. What? Zoro asked, barely managing to block the claws on Siam's hand with his sword. What the hell? He muttered in surprise. You just underestimated me, didn't you? Siam growled out, jumping away from Zoro now. I'm impressed you could block that, after my innocent cat act. You seem to have a little skill, but I wouldn't underestimate Siam of the Meowban brothers, Siam said as he stood in front of Zoro, licking his hand. At this point, Zoro was quick to realize the weight at his side was gone. Missing something? Don't look at me though, Siam said, Zoro's two swords on his back. There it is, Django said quietly. Cat burglar, Butchie continued. Give those swords back, Zoro growled out angrily. Give them back, but you already have a sword. These are just in the way, Siam said as he took the swords off his back, throwing them behind him and angering Zoro more. Alright, now I'm much lighter, he said as he licked his claw. Furious, Zoro charged towards the man with his single sword. You're supposed to take good care of other people's things, he yelled as he sliced the man's side, running past him and towards his two swords laying on the ground. Bastard, Siam screamed as he jumped into the air and landed on Zoro's back, grabbing both of the swordsman's arms. What? Zoro asked in both surprise and confusion. What did you cut? I can bend like a cat, Siam told the swordsman as his weight pushed Zoro to the ground. You're up, Butchie. Get him, Siam yelled to the other who ran their way. Right, brother, cat. The bigger man jumped into the air in the same way Siam had, holding his foot out to where Zoro's head lay. Astrophy, he screamed, Zoro rolling out of the way just in time as Butchie's foot landed where his head had been, crushing the ground. Damn, he got away, Siam growled in annoyance behind Butchie, having jumped over there when Zoro moved. Hey, hold him down, Siam. Butchie yelled in frustration. My bad, the bastard's way stronger than I thought. Siam said with another grin. He's not getting away this time. That's right, Siam and Butchie said as they prepared to attack again. I'm not that great at one sword style, but… With that, Zoro lifted the single sword up, readying himself. Let's do it, Butchie. Okay, let's go, Siam.